Good, lovely. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next of our set of interviews with New York School folks. We're joined today by Alexandra Gold, head preceptor in the Harvard College Writing Program, who lives in Boston, originally from Florida, received a PhD in English at Boston University, where she also worked on women's and gender and sexuality studies. And has recently published her first book, which I have here, which is marvelous. It's called The Collaborative Artist Book, Evolving Ideas in Poetry and Art. It's recently out with the University of Iowa Press in their Contemporary North American Poetry series. And it's a book that highlights how the artist book became a critical form for experimental American artists in the 20th and 21st centuries. And it looks at creative partnerships between people who we all kind of know and are familiar with as New York School people, Frank O'Hara, Mike Goldberg, Robert Creeley and Robert Indiana, Anne Waldman, George Newman, May Bursenbrug and Kiki Smith, and Erica Hunt and Alison Starr. So a lot that's of interest to us in our network in this book. And we first came across Alexandra in 2018, I want to say, when she came to a conference, our first kind of conference for the network in Birmingham in the UK, and following that wrote this really great blog post called On Seeing Kim Kardashian's Naked Portrait Not at the Museum of Modern Art, which was this great reading of a Kardashian Instagram nude in dialogue with Larry River's famous 1954 portrait of Frank O'Hara nude with boots. So Alexandra, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
today.
thank you for having me.
We always start these interviews by asking where you came into the New York School, like what your origin story is. How did you get into this stuff?
Sure. Yeah, my origin story was college. I had always loved poetry, and I had an English teacher in high school who really loved like Yeats and Eliot, and so I was always kind of interested. And then I got to college, and Charles Bernstein, who better to take a poetry class from, taught this class on post-1945. Among other classes he taught, one was post-1945 poetry. And so I was like, yeah, this seems amazing. Like, let's try this. And it was pretty much a life-changing class in a lot of ways. So that was the first time I ever encountered actually both the New York School and artist books, not simultaneously. We would do, different units, but one of the units was on the New York School. And I mean, Charles's work, as everyone knows, is a little bit more experimental. So it was like close reading, but it was also like these really like broad philosophical discussions really about like the poetry. And we would write these like response posts every week. And it just sort of blew my mind. And I think my real entry point was Schuyler more than O'Hara. I loved the work of James Schuyler, just was so drawn to it. The poem February, like pretty much blew my mind completely when I read it. And I ended up doing a sort of funny, creative, critical thesis on Schuyler and Larry Eigner. And so that was my real entry point. And then when I got to grad school, the next sort of like big aha moment for me was taking a art history class. I took a really interesting class on Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, Yvonne Rainer, a couple other people I'm forgetting. But I was talking about my final paper, and the professor was like, you should really write about Frank O'Hara and Jasper Johns. They have this great dialogue, all these like famous paintings and this conversation. And so that was it was like sort of those two moments. One was an introduction to the poetry, and then the next was like the introduction to the art. And then I became so interested in these sort of like collaborative conversations. So really, it's been an ongoing interest for me.
So interesting the way you describe it, because it's like there are all these intersections that present themselves immediately. I mean, taking a class on I know that syllabus, the Bernstein post-1945. I don't remember why I studied it so aggressively, but I remember studying the syllabus itself. So I know what you're talking about. And a lot of the New York School poets kind of debate where they place Bernstein within the whatever sphere, cloud. So, but we could maybe all agree that it's somewhere on the edge, like it's like within but without, you know. So I wonder if you might comment on just that way of entering in kind of from the side, you know, if that had an effect on you, because even when you're talking about art history, you know, and to go kind of from Jasper Johns to O'Hara is also a sort of peripheral entry point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm just drawn to things on the periphery in general. But yeah, I think, you know, I never got the sense that we were coming at it from like the outside looking in, except in the way we were talking and writing about it, more than like the presentation. Because the presentation was very much like, this is the New York School, here are some beat poets. And he did sort of like both indulge and resist those sort of categorizations. But I feel like what felt more peripheral than anything was just the approach of not like sitting there in close reading necessarily, of just having these sort of more open, sort of, as I said, philosophical conversations. And he really didn't do a lot of, if I'm remembering correctly, although this was quite a while ago, didn't really do a lot of like contextualization. Like, I don't think there was ever like, this is the New York School, this is sort of their ethos or whatever. It was sort of just like, here are the poems. I want you guys to tell me what you think about them, and then we'll structure the discussion around that. So I think if we came at it in a sort of peripheral way, it was like in the way that we approached it more than anything else. And yeah, and we didn't really talk a lot about the artwork at that point. We did do some artist books by like Susan B. and some other, like Jen Bervin. We looked at some like contemporary stuff. But yeah, it feels like I'm always sort of like finding my way in from the outside, which I don't know if that's because that's sort of how he approaches poetry, both sort of within and without the academy, that sort of stuck with me, or yeah, it could be like some sort of the way I like approach poetry, I feel like is very much that sort of like, let's talk about contexts and what's in the poetry without sort of like belaboring the poem itself. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but
Belaboring, you've just revealed yourself.
I really like what you said about indulging and resisting categorizations as well, because at the event last weekend, Charles said, he started by saying, he was like, you know, I can tell you a lot about New York schools. He was like, I went to elementary school there and I went to high school there.
Yeah.
And I know both the Berrigan brothers have also said that they consider themselves New York public school. And Paulo Javier has also talked about how the school for him is about like the freedom that you have at school, like the kind of weird stuff you can do in class at school. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as you said, can sometimes feel really peripheral and then lead you to this like the core kind of work
totally
that you do with your life.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right, because I think the classes were always so fun. I mean, Bernstein's sense of humor is just sort of unparalleled, and there was like a real, I think, I don't mean to say irreverence because it sounds negative, but I do think there's a sort of irreverence that I like kind of have brought to my study of poetry, in that like we can take it seriously without taking ourselves seriously, and we can take the work seriously, but also sort of find these other moments of connection and ways into it that aren't so strictly academic. Because I think that's you know, his big thing is like he's an academic without being an academic somehow. So yeah.
And has that humor. The humor seems really important in so much of like New York School work. Is finding the humor. At the way that I get my students to get Ashbery is by pointing out that he's really funny and odd, and so is Skylar. You know, Skylar's looking out the window and it's like looking at that baby and going, is it the sun that makes that baby pink? And just like there's this, and Charles's humor is obviously quite a different humor, but like you said, taking things seriously without taking ourselves too seriously seems to be important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, a lot of the poets feel that way about their own work in some sense too. Like they take themselves very seriously as poets, but never too serious. I don't know. I think maybe I grew up with two New York Jewish parents, so that sort of humor and that sort of New York sensibility I was like very drawn to, because I was like, I feel like I get this in some way.
Has this kind of fed into your book? I was really struck by the way in which you kind of talk about pleasure and unruliness and the periphery in the book. Do you feel like this kind of obviously this way into New York School and your kind of New York School origin story obviously has shaped the book, but do those kind of affects seem important to you in writing the book?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think both probably my own background and also the nature of the books themselves really, I think,
yeah,
are effective in a way that, not that all poetry isn't effective in some ways, but there's a sort of real pleasure in just the materiality of the book, which obviously comes into the writing as much as I could bring it in without actually having someone sit down and have the experience of holding one of these. But there's a real, I think, pleasure and sense of fun in just holding one of these books and looking through it. And it feels like they are very marginalized forms too, right? They're not, I talk a lot about this in the introduction, they're not really fully within the purview of literary studies. They're not fully within the purview of art history. So there's sort of this weird betweenness that I think is really fundamental to the form, and that I found really, really intriguing, which is difficult in some ways academically because you're not sort of fitting in one of these easy boxes or disciplinary boxes. But I think it's the real delight and sort of surprising aspect of some of the works.
How do you get around the materiality question? I think that's something that's just quite hard. I'm speaking mainly because I've done some bits and pieces on little magazines, and next term's cluster at Post 45 is just about to come out. So I've been thinking about this. Like you can go to the archives and handle the books, and I just wonder, how do you kind of convey that kind of affective materiality? Yeah. How do you work with that when you can't give the artist books to everyone who reads?
Yeah, not well. I mean, I try as hard as possible to sort of say that it's fun and delightful and look at these cool images, but I think it's almost impossible in some ways to replicate that experience. And I think it is a real limitation in terms of writing about these sort of books, is that, not everyone does have access to them. Not everyone can hold them. I think there's still a lot to be gained from reading about them or sort of, seeing it in this mediated form, but I don't think it's a limitation you can ever truly overcome in a certain way. I think it depends on the book too, because even some of the later books have come out in trade edition, but even that trade edition is sort of different. Like the Concordance book originally came out in an accordion format, and now it's just in a trade edition. And there's a great quote that Mamie Bersenberg has about how there's sort of an aura to the trade edition. And so I do think, there is a sort of aura that maybe you lose a little bit. And I hate to use the sort of like aura terminology because it's I don't know, very theoretical, but I do think you inevitably lose that, but there's a different aura that's gained from reading about them or thinking about them. I don't know, that's maybe an imperfect response to an imperfect endeavor, but yeah.
I mean, aura sits next to vibe, doesn't it? And we spend a whole vibing it out. I guess I'm starting to wonder if maybe your book also functions as an invitation to get closer to some artist books, through an interest in the artists themselves that would have drawn one to the book itself.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Like, I would love for everyone to be looking at these books and thinking about these books. I mean, almost every university library has some kind of artist book collection, whether it's small, whether it's big, or even if they don't have artist books, they've like related broadsides, or maybe they have zines or whatever it is. Like, I think there's so much opportunity that's just sort of wasted in the archive with these books. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's an invitation for scholars, for teachers to just, even if they don't write about them, go look at them, teach with them. Like, there's so much that I think can be gained from just seeing what's out there and just not letting them sit on the shelves. It seems like so much wasted art and poetry and writing is just sitting in these libraries that people don't know about or don't go to find.
Sure.
I really like the idea of, and this is kind of what your book does that I love as well, of like imagining the material. Do you know what I mean? Like you can, the way that you describe them, kind of like you gift them to readers in all these different kinds of ways. So the way that I hear you describing this book gives me a version of the book that's come from you, but that's also just mine. And I really like that idea that you can, they like exist but also don't exist. And then there's something that's so kind of boundary pushing about that. There's such kind of fascinating odd forms that come from two people or more people, and then the way that you kind of transmit them through your book, I think, and like brings them off the page in a way that it's not touching, but you do get a sense of their vibe, I think.
I'm all vibes. I'm just writing on vibes. No, I did. Thank you for saying that. I did try really hard to try and bring them to life as much as you can without actually, having them in front. And I think a big part of that kind of switched in one of the revisions, because at first I found myself very much writing like, here's the poetry, here's the art, very like segregated. Except for the homage to Alan G chapter, that one, just because the words and images were on the page, I started out writing about it together, and that really like shifted how I approached the rest of the chapters. And I think once I started to think about how I could write about both the art and the poetry simultaneously, that really helped open up a way to sort of like bring them to life in a way that is a little bit, that made it felt like a little more like the experience of actually seeing them in person. So I tried for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it really works. And I wondered too, did you feel that the kind of almost like going in reverse, like did the kind of personalities or the vibes of the people seem important as well? So like Anne Waldman, Frank O'Hara, like these quite kind of big personalities, Schneemann, like shaping the text that you're writing about. Did that kind of factor into, I guess, your decisions in terms of how you chose which artist books to focus on, but also how you were able to try and like get the vibe off the page?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, partially, to be honest, I chose it based on access, because so much of the problem with this is just like what you have access to and what you don't. So I had a couple that I knew I wanted to write about, and then the rest just sort of unfolded. But definitely, I felt like the personalities and sort of the collaborative spirit of each book really informed how I started to write about it. And I don't know if other people who write about poetry have this problem, but sometimes I would find myself almost slipping into like a kind of weird stylistic mimicry of the poets. So like for someone like Bersenbrugge, who's so like theoretical and if then, I found myself writing all these if then statements that I was like, what am I doing? And then for O'Hara, I felt like I was going on these like wild flights of fancy. So I feel like more than anything, the kind of like spirit of the book, I felt like kind of started to infiltrate how I was writing about it, what I was thinking about with each book, and sort of even down to like the style. I sometimes found myself catching myself feeling like I was almost trying to like emulate in prose, the sort of vibe of the poetry.
I want to ask a really like mundane sounding question. But, you and so many people that we've spoken to in these conversations are like working out of an academic space. But we were just chatting about how you don't actually teach the New York School. And so it almost feels like this is like a secret relationship that you're having on the side. Like you've got your day job and your night job. And a lot of people we've spoken to also do it that way. So I guess I'm wondering, if the style is kind of seeping into your being to the point where you're, writing in it in the book, how then did you how to create space between that work and your professional work? Or maybe the opposite is more interesting, like how did you come to the book having had a day of, for example, teaching writing and other topics?
Yeah, no, that's really funny that you say that, because I feel like so much of the experience felt really not secretive, but almost kind of secretive. Like I would like, get into my office, write for a couple of hours, and go teach. And my teaching is not really related to this at all. So it felt like I was just sort of like writing in bits and pieces where I could. And like I was doing the secret project. There was no expectation for me to be doing research. And then on top of that, I was writing about these kind of like secretive forms, not secretive, but, lesser known forms. So yeah, I don't know if it informed my teaching so much as it felt like a really nice respite in some ways from the teaching, where I could just come back and sort of be with these books and thinking about these books. And I do think if I were teaching and writing about the same thing simultaneously, I might not have had the stamina to finish the book, quite honestly, because it would have just been a little bit too much. So I actually like really cherished the sort of off times of like going in early or staying after class and just doing little bits of writing where and when I could. It felt, I think artist books in general feel very escapist to me. Like you escape into this other world, you get access to these sort of like lives and friendships. And I think in a way, the book also felt very escapist from the everyday work of teaching writing. And I think it was also quite beneficial to be writing and teaching composition simultaneously, because probably to the chagrin of my students, I was like, I'm revising too, I'm writing a thesis, I'm doing stakes. And they all kind of rolled their eyes at me, but it was, you know, it was like I was doing in practice what I was asking my students to do in some way. So it was both escapist and not, I suppose.
I was interested in the, and this is kind of going off Yasmine's question, the like the kind of collaborative interdisciplinary qualities that the book brings. It almost sounds like you've kind of got two versions of Alexandra collaborating with each other here. But it kind of ties into the questions of friendship and relationality and relatability and sociality and so on that we know are really important to conversations about the New York School. And I wondered, does that feel, again, is that something that was kind of important to the book, that fitting in with a sense of what friendship does as a kind of creative force?
Yeah, I think I was less explicitly focused on, you know, like thinking through friendship specifically. I obviously drew on work by like Andrew Epstein, who's written a lot about that and has really thought squarely about friendship. But I think I was really interested in accessing sort of like how the books came to be. So was it like casual friendship, like in the case of Anne Waldman and George Schneeman, who were neighbors and popping in on each other, or like in the case of O'Hara and Goldberg. So I found myself like really, really fascinated by just reading about the artists and their friendship, not necessarily thinking through friendship, but just sort of like gathering almost like the facts of like, how did this book come to be? Were they working together? Were they apart? I got to go read some letters between Frank O'Hara and the Tiber Press. I got to go see Creeley's letters. So like I was interested in the way friendship sort of inform the work, or the channels of sort of broader communication and network relatability, sociability sort of inform the work in those ways. I'm just thinking about like, literally, how did this book come to be, right? Like what was going on here? How did they know each other? What did they say about the friendship? For some books, it's easier to find than others. Like some books, there's just a wealth of information about, oh, these people were hanging out constantly and doing all these crazy little drawings. And then in the case of other books, it was more of a one-off or someone connected them. So I was really interested in those sort of moments of relatability or sociability of like, how did these two people come together, and how did this project sort of like materialize in general?
I was thinking about this, not that exactly, but today, when I was just, you know, we now as a community of people interested, let's just say, in poetry written around a certain time and place, and art, will like recuperate the work a little bit. You know, it doesn't really matter what press it was published with, we will find it, we will go to that library, you know, when you're talking about your visits to different places and archives. And it's almost like all they had to do was put it out there, and it was just so juicy that one day, you know, someone would smell it and go for it. But right now, the publishing field is so different. And I just, like, it's almost like less people need encouragement than, you know, like, it seems like when you're saying, how did they even come to put it together? In Rona and I's upcoming work on the cohort, it just feels like, well, if someone said you should do that, then they would do it, you know, or like, you should start your own, you know, okay. It's just like any energy of support and enthusiasm, and boom, you had a whole new press forming. It didn't matter if it made money or whatever. The whole point was just to get the work out there, you know, and there seemed to be this like deep belief that one day it would be attended to. Whereas now it's just such a different game, you know, if you know what I'm saying. I you know, you're like begging for a foot in the door for some major publisher or academic press that will, you know, price the book so high that no one but the library will ever purchase it. And it's just like, it's just such a different, so what I'm trying to get to is there is still this, you know, sepia tone nostalgia around this, like, go for it energy that had to exist in that, you know, in that moment.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not a question, sorry. I just I had to make sense of my my meandering thoughts today on publishing.
The nostalgia is real, though. I think it speaks to what I was saying earlier, why these things feel so escapist. It does feel like you're like going back into this like really particular moment, and you're like, you almost like, I don't know, this sounds like maybe delusional, but you're like, oh my gosh, I like feel like I'm almost like in the room with Anne Waldman.
Yeah, it's like that scene in a TV show where you get to be the ghost, you know, like watches everything and stands still while it's all, it is like that.
Totally. Yeah. So I think, and even like some of the books, like one of the most interesting ones to me was the homage to Alan G, where they're like tracing over Allen Ginsberg's photographs. So there really is that ghostly feeling of like all these ghosts sort of like just around the page in some way, like sort of like, and sort of like crafting the book to be, I think, intentionally nostalgic, but they do have a really nostalgic pull where you're like, I want to be friends with them. I want to go watch them.
You want to be the you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yes. Yeah.
Sorry, I took us down a road I shouldn't have. I just wanted to make sense of the things I was thinking of with what you're saying in mind. You know, with Rona, you saying what both of you are kind of getting to, like, wow, how did this come to be? And I'm just like, oh, well, everyone wanted each other to be, you know, and then they knew we would find them. And it's just such a different energy now. Alex,
and we're in this kind of odd but amazing for us period in which we can still talk to lots of these people. I have a friend who's similarly interested in kind of gossip and like how friendships happened and how that kind of underpins a lot of 19th century radical politics, but she can't go and say to these people, so how did you actually end up spending the night in Northamptonshire with this person in the 1822? So it's something that I think they're perhaps thinking, yes, this is going to matter someday, but there's this kind of like labor that's also happening, saying that no, actually it doesn't really matter, and it's kind of up to us to, like, Yasmine, you mentioned Ron Padgett before, talking about the nuts and bolts of poetry, and then the gossip of poetry, and the kind of gossip does seem really important and also nostalgic and fun and totally escapist, but also has a great role to play, I think, in like helping us understand these weird texts.
Yeah, I mean, he calls the gossip illuminating, which kind of further our like trajectory of Alexandra's work being kind of like coming out, you know, and putting a light on things from a certain angle. And there's that great quote, I wrote it down from the introduction. Kurt Aleslev talks about these books staying lit up forever. And I think, again, that sense of what do they illuminate? They also just illuminate themselves, and they kind of matter on their own terms. They make me think a lot of the work of Joe Brainard, which can be quite hard to talk about, but you actually just want to say, well, it matters because it matters, and it's just there. And again, like the pleasure and the unruliness of it matter in and of themselves.
I struggled with that. That's funny that you say that, because that was one of my biggest struggles in writing the book, is I wanted to just be like, but these are so cool, you should just look at them, because they're just so cool. And like, I just felt very like I wanted to light them up. And so when I was thinking about those like more technical aspects of writing, like what are the stakes of this, I was like, I don't know, they're really just so fun and I want you to see them. So I feel like that was, I mean, I think I found my way to it eventually, but my initial impulse was very much that of just like, I just want people to see these. They're so fun. They're so cool. And I did, to a certain extent, felt like they just speak for themselves. They're so cool. I don't even have to write about them. But that impulse felt very much like part of the initial stages of writing the book.
Just really loving them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and you're just making me think about how, like, you know, it's the work of scholarship to light it up, but also there's something within waiting to be lit up later. And it might not, you know, have a kind of, I'm thinking of Bernadette Meyer's Midwinter Day for some reason when you're talking, because I'm just like, you know, I feel like it's starting to gain in energy, just like Brainard's I Remember, you know, form has, or with its ceremonies and that sort of thing. I don't know, it's making me think that your work, and I think you would admit this too because of your own confession early on with the belabored poem, is partly the work of cultural criticism. And so there's this space here for like a cultural critique of why and when we start caring about these relationships between artists, and also the relationships between the artist and the book. Are you continuing in this vein, Alexandra? Is this like, do you, you know, sometimes when we finish a book, we think, phew, done, goodbye. And other times we think, oh, there's this thread that I didn't finish and I want to go off on it.
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think, yeah, just to your earlier point, I do feel, I'm not a cultural critic, but I do think when you're working between disciplines, that feels very present in the writing. Like you're sort of thinking about a cultural moment almost more than anything else, right? More than the individual art or poetry. So I definitely agree with that. I think I've had a little bit of a post-first book fatigue where I'm just like, I don't know where to go next, to be honest. I don't know that artist books are something I necessarily want to continue writing on, even though I loved doing it. And it was just, yeah, it's so much fun to write about. I have a couple of things I'm interested in. I do think I'm still interested in sort of like going back to our earlier discussion, peripheral or sort of marginal ways into things. Like one project that's been sort of percolating in my mind, but I haven't really started in earnest is Jasper Johns has this really like interesting sketchbook that was published as a sketchbook of all of his paintings. And I really want to write something about it as a sort of like poetic form and thinking about the sort of poetry of his sketchbook. So while not exactly an artist book, I do think my interest in poetry still comes from the sort of margins. Like, how do we think about these other cultural objects or just material forms as poetic or lyric, or sort of these other, you know, ways of thinking about poetry that aren't about poetry itself. So yes, maybe my failure to belabor the poem will continue in future work, but and then I also have some other stuff I'm interested in writing that's more in line with my class on sort of feminist, popular feminism, also maybe in the cultural criticism realm, but thinking about sort of like internet feminisms, and actually not far off from what I was writing about Jasper Johns and Kim Kardashian, or Harris and Kim Kardashian. So I'm interested in pursuing that kind of route as well.
I would definitely buy The Poetics of Sketch for sure. So, and I think that's secretly a formalist book. So I'm looking forward to it.
I think that sounds amazing. I would definitely read that as well. I was talking to the artist poet Sophie Herxheimer, who drew some sketches of the New York School event that we had in London last weekend, and sent them to me, and there's kind of her notes alongside these sketches of people reading and talking, and I was just thinking about how the idea of the sketch as poem, also sketching as a form of note-taking, and how those things are different. I think
the ephemera is that kind of stuff, like really is interesting, like the sort of things that are not meant to be taken seriously, but we should take, that I want to take seriously. And in Jasper Johns' sketchbook, all of his like most famous paintings are there, but he has this great line that's like believing painting to be language. So it just feels like such a natural way into it.
Look at Alice Notley's Runes and Chords. I mean, look at, she's completely presented that as poetry, right? The like iPad note sketch form. So there you go.
Yeah. Shaping up one chapter on each of these. But that is, I think I could see myself going down that route a little bit, like thinking about these sort of like, I kind of wish I could go back and study art history because I'm so interested in it, but I'm still so fascinated by the interest. Yeah, it's not too late.
No, I remember I have like a side interest, and I remember consulting with someone that was an expert in that field and being like, I think I need to go study this and like get a PhD on this topic too. And they're like, well, you're already writing on it, so you're doing it. Like, you don't need to go get the PhD on it, you know? So, I mean, you're already writing it, you're already doing it, you know? It sounds like you are already an art critic to me.
Yeah. I think I was really interested in just asking you a bit about that, because your work is very, I don't know, cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary. You're sort of touching all of these different realms very successfully, and I wondered about that. Is that does that just kind of happen? Are you just sort of looking at text and treating all text as text and thinking about how we write about what we see?
Yeah, I think I'm just like very interested in the intersection of sort of three fields. Obviously poetry, because that's sort of what I was trained in, and that's sort of what I came up doing. Art history became sort of like a real passion of mine. And then I think the third thing is book history. I'm not a true book historian in you know, the way that I wasn't trained as a book historian, but I took a really generative class in grad school on Shakespeare, and that was the first book history class that really made me think about the materiality of books and sort of how we approach books as objects. And so I feel like my work, I think I just come to all of the work I do sort of from some kind of weird intersection of those three disciplines of like thinking about the book as an object, thinking about the poetry, thinking about art. And that sort of informs, I think in general, just how I think about poetry quite a bit, like thinking about material parameters, any kind of art or visual components, and then the poetry itself. So I tried to negotiate those three things. I think it's always, and I talk about this in the book, it feels a little bit risky when you go outside of your field, because you feel just a little less confident. You're like, oh, is some art historian going to come out and be like, you got this all wrong? Like that blue swatch means something else. So it's kind of a fun challenge. And I got to read, I really enjoy reading across the different disciplines and just seeing how the different disciplines sort of approach the work. TJ Hines, I think I quote this in the book, has like a really great line about like there's no fury like an art historian reading music than like a literature scholar reading an art history. I don't know, something about like crossing the disciplines. And he just sort of is joking about the sort of fury that sometimes happens.
But the art historians don't read our books. We read theirs, but they don't read ours, so you're safe. I feel.
The quote, but his general premise was like this sort of like, I don't know, sometimes we do get very stuck in our disciplinary silos, and there can be a lot of like competitiveness almost, or like, oh, you can't have that, this is our thing. And so I think I always am a little bit worried about that, because I'm like, I feel most confident as a poetry scholar, but I want to like read really heavily in the art history realm. I want to, you know, think about this from a sort of like materialist perspective. So yeah, I think anybody who's worked on cross-disciplinary work maybe has a little bit of that anxiety.
Definitely. And our poets don't allow for us to just sit in poetry and only look at text and pages, do they? You're looking at Frank O'Hara and you're suddenly like, what is this artist's book? Or like find something like Stones that he did with Larry Rivets and be like, well, how do you can't just go, well no, I better leave that to someone else.
You can.
And Alice is a great example. Alice just, you know, you can't kind of predict what's going to happen next in her work.
Who knows? Internet feminism, maybe. I like it. We all left that one to the side, Alexandra. It's really interesting, but we're right now.
Like a conversation for a different day.
There's conversation.
Too many rabbit holes to go down that route.
Should we?
What were you going to say? Sorry,
your question was probably on topic. Mine was off.
It was just quite a general one. It was just about kind of how, I guess, sort of on this note, but not terribly, is just how New York School and the stuff that you write about kind of features elsewhere in your life. Does it kind of shape and inform your other enthusiasms, or, you know, what you might go and see in an art gallery, but also watch on TV or listen to, you know, when you're listening to music? Does it kind of bleed out into out of your office?
I think in some ways it does. I think in some ways I felt like reading and writing about something like the New York School or even pop art, but especially someone like Frank O'Hara, almost gives you license to like really relish pop culture, which is sort of an obvious statement for anyone who's ever read Frank O'Hara. But I find that I just like, to me, it's never occurred to me not to take pop culture seriously as sort of like art or a sort of artifact that tells us something about the world we live in or the time we live in. And I think in that way, it's sort of like really gave me license not only to bring it into the classroom, but to just really like enjoy it in everyday life. And I think like I'm really uninterested in the sort of like high-low distinctions. And I think the New York school like maybe wasn't the only thing to license that for me, but really I think affords us permission as scholars to sort of like get beyond those sort of binary this is high art, this is low art, because I think it's all part of the work and it's all informing, you know, our lives, our scholarship, our teaching, and all of that. So I think in that way, I find that it like bleeds in a little bit to my work.
I was going to ask the very trite, what's your favorite question, just to bring it back to the poetry itself. If you would humor it, not maybe if you had to sort of turn anyone on to what you're doing and you wanted to say, here, look at this poem, this is why, what would it be?
Oh man, that's such a hard question. Let me think about that for a second. I mean, my initial impulse was to say, this is not from the book, but February by James Schuyler, which I started because I think that just sort of was so transformative for me. Although I could see many people being like, it's about a flower in a vase. Like, I don't know. This is nice. I think I would have them look at one of the artist books, actually. And maybe I would start with Erica Hunt and Alison Sarr's The Artist Book, both because it's accessible. So it's like pretty easy to get to. And I've also done this with a couple of people, and I think the images there are especially striking. So even though the poetry, I think, is among the slightly more dense, perhaps, of the others, I feel like that one, there's something arresting about the poems and the images in that sequence that I think could maybe get someone interested in it. So it's not really a poem, but I might give them the book as a whole, just to sort of like fully access what I'm interested in. Because yeah, I think the images there, and what I love about that book too, is the images are printed on vellum. So there's a real like textuality or materiality to the paper itself. And I feel like that book in some ways encapsulates a lot of my interests in these forms. So again, I'm not belaboring the poem by answering your question and saying, I would not show them a poem. I would show them a poem.
Not even giving us a poem.
Yeah, I don't know. The poem question I would have to think more about, like if there were one poem, but to me, February like continues to just, maybe because it was, you know, my entry point, but I feel like that poem to me just, I don't know. Yeah, just completely.
What is it? I love that poem as well.
Yeah.
And I wonder what is it about that poem for you? Like, what was it there? Can you remember what it was? But just
yeah, I think just like, I mean, this sounds like the most low-hanging fruit answer, but the simplicity of it, and just really taking such a hard look at like a very singular moment of something, right? And really like, it's very still life like in its composition, where we're just like intensely looking at something, but it's also incredibly, I think, emotionally evocative at the same time. And I think that's like, that was like, to me, what really attracted me to James Schuyler's work is just the like intensity of looking and intensity of feeling simultaneously. I don't know. I was also like kind of an, you know, angsty college student. So I'm sure something in the work spoke to me, because tends to be a little more on the, maybe not angsty side, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was like the intensity of feeling and intensity of looking simultaneously that I was just really like, I don't know that I'd ever seen that in poetry. And I find myself really drawn to that in his poetry.
Yeah. And the way that it's still life-like, but then it moves.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. You think you're looking at something and then it changes. It's a little bit like that moment in For Grace After a Party where the line goes, isn't there suddenly an ashtray there beside the bed? And you're like, wait, where? What?
Yeah.
And with like the boxy trucks that go up into the sky.
I'm trying to think of the name. I think the other one by Schuyler that I love that's very similar, I think it's December 1st. Is that the one about the Christmas tree? color center. Like those two poems, I think for me were just such like, they feel very similar vibes to go back to our day. But yeah, that way they're sort of like, they like take you, they like transport you, but they're also about just like this I don't know. It's, I almost can't put words, but it's about a moment, but they take you somewhere.
Yeah.
And you're bringing it with O'Hara too, because when you said that about the ashtray, I was thinking about Osanam April, where, you know, like the rooftops are applause, and then we're in a whole different, I mean, that kind of like that skip that you're allowed to do from the still life.
Yeah.
Magical.
And there's that's the other poem by Schuyler called Thursday, where he's in a cab driving down one of the avenues, and he's like talking about how he's counted all the leaves on all the trees. And then he goes, not individually, I did it in bunches. You're like, okay. And then he says, oh, there's a fifth season as well, which he doesn't want to tell us the name of because it's his, like, and it's just, it's
very childlike.
Yeah, yeah. And just gorgeous. Yeah, more Schuyler. He's magical.
Yeah, I've never written about Schuyler. I've been too scared to write about because I think it feels too close to my heart almost, that I like almost don't want to touch it. But
who's been writing about Schuyler forever? Is it Daniel Katz? Am I getting that right, in England?
I'm not sure. I want to say Nathan Kernan is a Schuyler person. But yeah, more Schuyler. Schuyler. If anyone's out there, let us know.
Yeah, definitely.
Just to finish, have you been reading anything or watching anything or seen anything that you would think, oh, this feels very New York School, or New York School people might enjoy this?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I feel like my tastes are very eclectic and lean more to like the terrible reality TV type genre. So
you're not alone.
You know, I don't know if there's anything out there in particular, but one thing I think at some point the Palladino, the Sherman Palladino, who did Marvelous Miss Maisel.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I read this online that she was writing some kind of show about the New York art scene in the 50s, or someone was developing a show about particularly this. So I don't know if I'm like starting a rumor that's not real, but
okay, I did it too with Daniel Katz, so
but that would be what
how stuff makes, so like if it's like Wayne's World, isn't it? Like if we invite them, they will come.
Gossip. Yeah.
Yeah.
We started with gossip and we're ending with gossip. Like, I don't know. Let's go. Bye.
Somebody do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I was really interested in that. And I was like, I would be thrilled to see that show. I don't know if it's actually happening, or if, again, I'm just starting some crazy rumor or speaking it into existence. But
I mean, actually, there is this weird tenuous link to, you know, Schitt's Creek, which is not necessarily like brand new, but with what's his name, Daniel Levy and Joe Brainard. He was wearing the Joe Brainard clothing. You know, that, what was the brand that did the Joe Brainard collection recently? The like
Lowe, I think it's pronounced Lowe. The Loue.
Maybe. I think there was like a kind of
that made all the handbags.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And then he was seen holding one.
Ooh.
Yeah. So there you go. More gossip. This is turned into us news. Let's call it before I keep going.
All the little tidbits. Okay, well, in that case, we'll finish here. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us today, talking us through your brilliant book, the work that you've been doing, and yeah, here's to future work on sketches and Jasper Johns and possibly Schuyler as well. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you in New York.
Yes, I'm hoping that I can get there and would look forward to that. Thank you both so much for this opportunity. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you.